Hello, welcome and good evening to everybody, or good morning for some of the people in the room, and maybe good night, maybe later at night for those people in the Far East, if there are any who've joined us tonight. This is a joint evening or a joint session with the IOSH branch of the Chiltern branch and the chair, Melissa Mark, who just joined us. Do you want to say a few words about Chiltern branch as the scene sets?
Yes, hello everyone. Sorry, I was actually in another panel discussion about the value of equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion for the HSC profession. So, and it's such a deep ongoing debate that it's running over by half an hour. So welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to this session. I'm really excited about this topic. For several reasons, and I know David will kick off into it as well, but, really excited that the Chiltern branch has collaborated with EWMG for the session around the discussion around climate change and our role as OSH professions in it going forward, if we have a role. So I guess that would be the discussion. So Chiltern branch for IOSH members, we always welcome new members, and we welcome people coming who are not even our branch members joining our sessions like today. We have an active committee and community, granted all virtual at present. We're looking at a face-to-face session in early 1Q next year, so you'll see more comes. I'll put on the chat where you can follow us on LinkedIn, and we always welcome people sending us comments to the committee, always open to feedback, etc. But I'll let David talk more and introduce the presenters.
Thanks very much, Melissa. Yeah, also thanks to Chiltern branch. This is their one of their monthly meetings. The EWMG being a group rather than a branch, we tend to work and share sessions with different geographic branches over the year. So this is one where Chiltern decided to host this. It's an evening branch, which is a bit different from usual, but we do try and share it around. So some people have the morning and some have the evening. And we also, this is being recorded as well for people as well. So people can sit and watch this at their leisure later on. As well as Chiltern having a LinkedIn page, the EWMG have a LinkedIn page. In fact, many groups and branches have LinkedIn pages. And if it's well worth having a look at all of them through LinkedIn, just putting the IOSH EWMG, and a whole range of different groups will come up as well, as you know how LinkedIn works. Climate change mentioned by Melissa, I'm a little less adventurous. I think it's broader environment and sustainability issues around that, linking to our profession or professionals that want to work with us or areas we want to go. And we've opened this door up completely to a really wide range of speakers, because whether the profession itself is what professionals want to do or vice versa, it's down to you. And this opens a few ideas to people. So this has been inspired, I think, by Melissa and I spotting Scott being our first speaker's paper in an American publication and journal. So, and then we've got Alan, who I've worked with for a number of years, both in local authority and later in academia, extremely passionate about carbon management. And then Veronica Scranio, who's one of our EWMG members, who's really been interested in sustainability and circular economy and things in that area, and knows far more about that than me. So hopefully three rather diverse different speakers. So Scott, over to you to introduce yourself. Welcome, and we look forward to listening to you.
Again, my name is Scott Gunderson. I'm currently a senior safety engineer. I'm at Daimler in Portland, Oregon. I've got some experience going back to the semiconductor industry, where I was in semiconductor environmental health and safety for approximately 10 years. And most recently, I spent 8 years at Oregon OSHA as a senior safety compliance officer, conducting workplace safety inspections, serious workplace accident investigations, and workplace fatality investigations. I recently left Oregon OSHA in May of 2021, May of this year, to return to the private sector for that opportunity at Daimler. I want to make very clear, I am not a subject matter expert on climate science or climate policy. I did write an article, Climate Change in the Safety Profession, that I was fortunate to see published in the August 2021 edition of Professional Safety. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to see that or read that. That was based on my experience and observations as a working safety professional. I've been paying attention to climate change for many years, and in addition to noticing all the other effects that we're seeing, I've noticed it having some influence on my own scope of work. So for that, I want to move to another slide. Okay, there we go. Some technical challenges, my apologies. This is just, let's just indulge in a bit of trip back through time, going all the way back to late 1990s. And I like this. I'm not a graphic designer, but I do like this this slide because it almost looks like a bar chart. And what you can see is that over time, as we move left to right, the activity does escalate. In the 1990s, late 1990s, I was in the semiconductor industry, a small semiconductor fab in Hillsboro, Oregon, in the Portland, Oregon area. Our team did, again, both environmental and safety. We did both, our team of 4, and we routinely worked through customer audits. Our largest customers would come mostly for ISO 9001 quality management purposes, supply chain audits. I remember when these first started, it was purely a regulatory focus. And in fact, I actually didn't even meet our biggest customers. One of the representatives from my employer would come to my desk with a checklist, a pre-audit checklist with some simple questions. Did we have an air permit? Did we have a wastewater permit? Were we disposing of our hazardous waste according to regulations? So the answers were yes, yes, and yes. And my fellow coworker left, engaged with the customer, and I never saw her again until the next audit. They eventually started pulling us in, and where I would actually speak to the customers and give evidence of our permits and the activity we were doing to comply with those. But it was purely a regulatory focus. Did we have the permits? Were we complying to the regulations that were necessary for operating a business in that area? And the answer was yes. There was a shift in the early 2000s. Our customers got away from regulatory focus and started moving more into environmental management systems, and were asking us questions about whether or not we were certified to the ISO 14001 standard. We were not at the time. And of course, the question was, why not? And there was escalating pressure to demonstrate that we had an environmental management system, that we were certified to ISO 14001. So the late 1990s expectations, were we complying with the regulations, were no longer good enough. And we saw that pressure to start certifying to the ISO 14001 standard. At that time, we were not using the word sustainability as I hear it these days. Also, climate change was not even discussed. I have no memories of climate change or carbon or greenhouse gases being discussed during these audits. It was purely a 14001 yes or no. It was started out as no, and it moved to yes. In 2013, I left the private sector and went to the public sector, Oregon OSHA, again, as a regulatory agency in Oregon for workplace safety. We were seeing increasing temperatures during my inspections every summer. Every year, it started getting warmer and warmer. We started seeing an increased number of temperatures above 90 Fahrenheit, which in your thermometers would be 32 Celsius. These were very unusual temperatures for us at the time. I grew up in the Portland, Oregon area, and we were accustomed to much cooler, milder summers. So it was getting warmer. There were no regulations yet, no regulations whatsoever. We did get a program directive from our leadership at the state capitol in Salem to review heat stress hazards at our assigned locations. And really what it came down to at the time was water, rest, and shade. If the answer was yes to those 3 items, we were largely done. In 8 years at Oregon OSHA, I never wrote a single citation for heat stress. As the 2020s began, and I was winding up my Oregon OSHA career, we started seeing unprecedented heat. We recently had a previously unthinkable temperature here of 116 Fahrenheit. Again, your thermometer's 46 Celsius. If you had told me that I would see temperatures this warm in Portland, Oregon when I was a young man, I would have told you were crazy. But here we are on the other side of it. We also started seeing wildfire smoke from the forest fires outside the Portland area, encroaching into the Portland airshed. And again, I grew up in the area. In my childhood, my teens, my young adulthood, I never smelled forest fire smoke until about 3 years ago. So another hazard coming towards us, air quality, in addition to unprecedented temperatures. There was still no regulations yet as I was leaving Oregon OSHA. I want to return to a moment on the semiconductor industry. I had conversations with my colleagues that I had left behind. And to me, this is like when you look at an hour hand or a minute hand on an analog clock, it's not moving when you're watching it, as I was in the 90s and 2000s, because the movement is so slow. But when you walk away from this clock and look back at it, you've noticed that hand has been moving the whole time, because you can see it's in a different location. I had conversations with a lot of my colleagues to plan a conference we were having in the area, and the subject of customer audits came up. And it was almost as if they had compared notes to give me a uniform response, that the audits had escalated in a way that I had no idea was coming. I had not seen. Very, very strong customer pressure to reduce greenhouse gases, and a lot of activity on renewable energy purchases, things that previously I was not doing, and my colleagues that I'd left behind in this industry are suddenly spending a lot of time doing. So you can see the activity going up as I've been watching it for a couple of decades. I return to the private sector, and I'm seeing a lot of activity. In fact, this summer, some of my first assignments at my new employer are responding to and building programs for temporary emergency rules on heat stress and wildfire smoke from Oregon OSHA. Now, this is Oregon OSHA, my state. Nothing yet is happening out of Washington, D.C. or at the federal level, but a lot of states in the United States are moving in this direction. The West Coast, particularly north of me, Washington, and south of me in California. So there's a lot of activity at the state level, and some of my first projects as I moved back into the private sector, we're responding to these hazards related to climate change. Again, heat stress, there was a temporary rule adopted for that. And then wildfire smoke, as you can see those photographs down there from last summer, 2020, absolutely dystopian levels of smoke in the city of Portland that we had never seen before. I use the word temporary because that's the way the agency works. They can issue a temporary rule for 180 days rapidly, which they did. I cannot speak for Oregon OSHA, but it's my prediction that these rules, or ones very similar to them, will be made permanent in time for next summer. I would bet on that. I would absolutely bet on that. Other hazards and activities driven by climate change. We just updated our emergency response plan at my new location. And for the first time at this location, and for the first time in my career, I have included wildfire hazards. And I don't mean the smoke from the forest fires 100 miles from my location. We have an oak grove on a hill adjacent to our property. If you were to Google Earth it and see it, you would see it wrapping the north and east sides of our property. It's a fire hazard completely outside of our control. It is getting drier and browner every year. We have a homeless population who lives in it. They smoke, they cook food. We have had some homeless camps in the city go up in flames. Not this one yet, but it's just a matter of time before we see this oak grove catch on fire and threaten some of our assets close to the fence line. And I think this is consistent with a lot of the work I did previously on the previous slide with heat and wildfire smoke. Most of my career, the hazards that I've been dealing with, either as a private sector safety engineer or a public sector safety compliance officer, has dealt with the hazards that are inside the location, under control of the employer, the machine, the process, the chemical, the forklift traffic inside the warehouse. Now I'm looking at 3 examples: heat, wildfire, smoke, and a fuel source right outside my fence line that is completely outside my control, off property. And that's a new way of looking at hazards for me, dealing with hazards of this magnitude that I have absolutely no control over and no ability to really eliminate or manage. I just have to deal with them. Other activities, there's some tension between myself and the environmental engineer. He has a fairly strong energy conservation metric. We are in a building constructed in 1967 when air conditioning was not needed in Portland. This is a large, porous building that will be very challenging to cool. And how do we efficiently and effectively cool it and still meet our energy conservation metric? This is going to be a challenge. Additionally, this is touching on the wider organization with sustainability, again, a term we did not use much years past, as a branding strategy. There's a lot of attention locally and nationally on my employer moving towards electric trucks. We're starting to build them at my location. Carbon neutral vehicle production, we're seeking press on this, and we're getting press on this. It's a branding strategy. It's a recruiting issue for some folks. I was at a job fair, and I actually I was representing my employer at a job fair, and I got a number of questions about the electric trucks. So this is getting some visibility outside the organization. People are paying attention to it. In this case, it's something we're demonstrating a positive movement in response to this. Moving on to the next slide, I expect climate change to continue to have significant influence on just about everything I do. Again, I don't speak for my current employer. I don't speak for my former employer, Oregon OSHA, but I see this everywhere, and I expect to be dealing with it for the rest of my career. I expect continued stress on my employees' operations in the community. I've already talked about heat, air quality, extreme weather events. I have my own issues to deal with in the Pacific Northwest, in the Midwest, and the South, hurricanes, and I'm not even on coastal property where I'm dealing with rising sea levels. So it really is location specific, but I see this touching just about everything. I see myself dealing with this in a professional capacity for years. There's a lot of information out there on insurance expenses are going up. Loss prevention activities, I've already talked about dealing with that oak grove as a fuel source that could threaten my assets, and asset hardening in the terms of shoring up our assets for extreme weather activities. I expect continued regulatory activity. I have no crystal ball, and I cannot predict what will happen in Washington, D.C., but certainly the state that I'm working in, the state a number of my colleagues in other states are working in, are dealing with local regulations, and even down to local building codes, a tree canopy requirement in Portland to offset the heat island effect. So there's just a lot of regulatory activity that we have to respond to. And then just continued pressure on organizations to demonstrate action and the attention on the ESG disclosures. And I already talked about sustainability as a branding activity. So my wider organization is dealing with this, and I'm in a position of having to work around that. So since I expect that this is going to continue, and I expect that I'm going to complete my career dealing with climate change and climate hazards, I'm looking for opportunities to learn and stay informed of changes. On LinkedIn, I follow a number of groups just to pay attention and monitor trends, risk management, insurance, consulting, even investment activity and announcements from large organizations. It gives me a far lookout that allows me to pay attention and have some idea of what may be coming down the pipeline. I'm evaluating continuing education opportunities. It is a requirement of one of my certifications, and frankly, I do enjoy it. Antioch University has a climate resilience certificate for professionals that may be a good fit for me. It's not policy, it's not science, it's resilience, which is what I believe I'm practicing as a working safety professional. And then I'm looking for professional networking opportunities. In addition to American Society of Safety Professionals. American Society of Adaptation Professionals may be a good fit. I haven't joined them yet, but they seem to be positioning themselves in terms of resilience and adaptation, and how do we deal with this looming hazard that we're all going to have to live with. I want to end with a recommendation of a book that I enjoyed by Graham Bell, the Organizational Resilience Handbook. He talks about a number of major trends, including climate change, and he talks about them producing transformative changes and encourages organizations to be alive to this. He advocates something called horizon scanning. It's a term that I've really come to like, and the need to be prepared for what he calls the massive and ongoing change, which is almost universally predicted. Again, I expect to be dealing with this for the rest of my career, and I believe that something that I'm going to have to pay attention to, not only for my own professional capabilities, but also for preparing my own employees for the hazards of a warming world. I thank you again for your time. I will go off share and turn it over to our next panelist.
Hello, Scott. Don't go away.
I will not.
There's one question has come in already at this stage. I want to pick that up right now because those temperatures, by the way, are scary. I wouldn't pay anything in a sauna for that temperature in fairness. You couple of points interestingly. You did mention the word of engineers, environmental engineers. We hear about safety engineers in the States. I think obviously now as profession, health and OSH professionals now. How do you see this? Do you see health and safety as an engineering discipline? Do you think it links in with that at all? Well,
I believe it does. There's a lot of engineering practices in this activity, but for the most, what we do is environmental health and safety program management, building programs to position the organization to set our employees up for success. I'm currently working in a location where I only do safety. That's rare in Portland. Most of the jobs here in the Portland area, you do safety and environment. I'm in a very large organization where we're a bit more specialized, and my colleague is pure environment. I am pure safety. And previous jobs I had, I wore both hats and did both. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. Thank you very much. And Naveed has asked a question. Question for Scott: does OSHA, EPA have any linkage when it comes to environment? And so you mentioned the challenges between. So does that? So it's so in terms of regulation between health and safety, environment in Oregon, how linked are they together that way?
No, there's a division of labor. When I was with OSHA, I focused on workplace safety, the potential injury or illness to the worker. I was never an environmental regulator. I did not look at hazardous waste containers or air permits or anything of that nature. Another agency did that. I could refer and let them know that I saw something that was suspicious, but I could not actually engage in much work in that when I was with OSHA. So there's a division of labor.
Thank you. Melissa, do you want to pitch in with a question?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks again, Scott, for coming on to this. I wanted to confirm with you the Professional Safety Journal article that you had. Would it be okay for us to share that with the group?
Absolutely.
Yes. Right, great, good, thanks. So, and again, thanks for the presentation. You touched on it in your presentation where you talked about some of the things you're doing to enhance, I guess, your skills and so. So I guess I had a question, what would be one or two additional tips you would give for the audience here for them enhancing their skills and knowledge in this area around, again, the role that we may be playing with climate change and some of the things we're seeing emerging?
I would say pay attention and find some trusted resources, whether it's your own insurance company, because the insurance companies are paying attention to this, whether it's a local regulator, if you can work with them and if you trust them. I don't know how that works on your side of the Atlantic, but certainly find some trusted regulators and some trusted resources and engage with them frequently. So that you can stay on top of this, because it's escalating. It's also rapidly changing. The information changes rapidly, and I believe it's something that you need to pay continuous attention to. It's not like fall protection, where if you mastered it 20 years ago, there may be a few changes in technology and harnesses and lanyards, but gravity is gravity. This is changing dramatically, both in terms of the effects we're seeing and the policies that are being driven or not because of it.
No, thanks for that. And just a follow-on question. Again, you touched on it a bit in the response to David. So do you see, because you said like in your organization right now, your safety, there is an environment role and in the past you've done health, you've done safety and environment. So in my previous roles, I've done safety and environment. But do you see there'll be more of that, or do you see continued separation, or meaning are more OSH professionals going to be expected to take on environmental roles?
In my experience on the West Coast of the United States, I believe it's better to be a generalist and to be able to do both, because that is most of the employment opportunities. Portland does not have a lot of large employers. Daimler Trucks of North America has approximately 33,000 employees. in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. So we do specialize, but that's very rare in the Portland, Oregon area. I would always recommend know both, because there's more opportunities, and most of the jobs that I find on Indeed are both, not one or the other.
So the last thing I'll say, and then I'll hand back to David, is that I see that because like I get LinkedIn notifications, and it's interesting how many roles you're seeing now where sustainability is being added into it. So my current job title is health, safety, and sustainability, right or wrong, but you're seeing more and more of those kind of jobs being advertised. I'm seeing so many more sustainability roles, and this is on the UK side. So it's just been interesting seeing that change. So again, I'll hand back to David.
And these are my colleagues in the semiconductor industry who are having to purchase renewable energy. They're doing environmental health, safety, and sustainability. Yeah.
Well, we'll pick up a question for the general chat at the end on that one. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you very much, Scott. Alan, welcome. If we go from Oregon to Oxford, kind of.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David. So my name's Alan Asbury. I've been in sustainability since the late 90s. I've been in energy and fleet management for the last 15, 16 years. And I spend most of my time these days working with large commercial organizations, typically factories, manufacturing and haulage, and some local government, explaining, or first of all, auditing their buildings for energy and fleet savings and fuel savings, and then trying to explain to their finance directors what it's all about, which is a big challenge. I also work as a chair of a low carbon club, trying to bring local public sector and private sector together to share technologies. So these are some of the councils we've been kind enough to get recommendations from recently, and some companies, the type of companies we work with in terms of getting them to environmental standards and getting energy efficiency into their operations. So I wanted to talk through some of the basics here tonight, because I hear from so many very intelligent people, finance directors, technical directors, really basic questions about physics and about coal and about carbon. So I wanted to flush some of those out tonight. So carbon is given a really bad name in the climate change event, because carbon is diamond, it's graphite, it's what you find in that pencil. In fact, the surround of that pencil, the wood of that pencil, is 50% carbon. You and I are 20% carbon. Carbon is not a problem until you burn it. And when you burn it, you create carbon dioxide, because you're allowing the carbon that has been sequestered in that tree for hundreds of years, potentially, to escape as a gas. And this is the problem we have, because carbon dioxide is a real issue. And I want to whiz you through this very, very quickly. This is courtesy of Carl Sagan, the late, great Carl Sagan. And this condenses the history of the universe, 13.8 billion years, into a 12-month calendar. So Big Bang happens right at the very start of January the 1st here, and nothing much happens for 9 months, and then the Earth appears and the solar system about 9 months later. And then not much else happens for a while. We get to December and we start seeing amphibians about 9 days ago. We've seen land plants about 12 days ago. Dinosaurs kick in around about the sort of 25th of December. They die out around about the 30th of December. So about a day ago, effectively from now. So we're now on the final day, and human beings start to emerge from chimpanzees about 8 o'clock in the evening on the last day of the last month of that year. And then we move through very quickly and we get down to the last 45 seconds or so. And we start seeing things like the last ice age. We start seeing cave drawings, agriculture. We start understanding in the last 10 seconds about things like Christ being born, Columbus discovering the Americas. And so all of everything we've ever heard of, everything we've ever written down, every battle, every war, every monarch has happened in the last 10 to 15 seconds of this very, very long calendar. So the important thing here I'm trying to pull out is that in half a second on that calendar, the Industrial Revolution began. So 10 seconds ago, sorry, half a second ago, or 260 years ago, around 1750. And so in that period, since the 1750s, 1760s, we've extracted more than half of all carbon-rich fossil fuels from the ground, as in coal, oil, and gas. And we burned them in just half a second. And if you look at that just for the UK alone, since 1750, the UK has cumulatively burned 70 billion tonnes of CO2 into the atmosphere. Now, you're going to hear all the time people saying to you, technology provides the solution. There's billions of tonnes of fossil fuels left. It's just natural variation. Sun cycles, sunspot activities causing climate change, it's not real. The Earth's massive. What possible effect can humans have? Well, if I showed you that picture and you say, well, it's a lot of coal at a train station, that's about 5 minutes of coal for the world. 5 minutes supply of coal you're looking at right there. Think about the amount of cars on the road. This is the amount of barrels of oil that are extracted year on year since the year I was born, 1969. So 15 billion barrels. And for perspective, a billion barrels is 3.38 billion litres, or 3.38 billion fill-ups. It's huge numbers. Now, I talked about carbon, and as I say, carbon is wrongly named because we talk about carbon footprint, carbon emissions, carbon accounting, carbon capture and storage and offsetting. But in reality, it's all about CO2, or specifically CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalents, also known as greenhouse gases or GHGs. Now, this is the basket from Kyoto. Kyoto was 1997. It was ratified by most countries in 2005. And there were 6 and now 7 gases which are problematic in the atmosphere. And you can see them scored there by what's called global warming potential, as in what damage they cause for the next 100 years in the upper atmosphere. And you can see that carbon dioxide is scoring 1, an arbitrary 1. And compared to CO2, methane scores 28. So it's 28 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. You look through the list and you get to nitrogen tetrafluoride at 23,500, but there's very little of that. The reality is that carbon dioxide, whilst a small number, about 81% of gases in the upper atmosphere are carbon dioxide, which is why it's a problem. Now, what's the problem with coal or CO2? Well, the problem with CO2 is that you can't see it and you can't smell it. It's non-tangible. When you talk about it, you have people talking about balloons worth of CO2, and then they talk about tons of balloons of CO2. And people can't get a head around the idea of a ton of gas. It doesn't mean anything to people. But if you look at what coal is, it's about 3/4 carbon and about 1/4 hydrogen, and then a few other things. And it's the hydrogen that's got the energy. That's the bit we want to burn out of it. So to visualize this, if you imagine going to a supermarket and buying a bag full of ice cubes, and you bring them home, you drop them into a jar, and gradually over time they melt and form water, a liquid version of ice cubes. And then you pour that into a kettle, and you switch the kettle on, and it steams. And over time, that steam will come out of it and become a gas into the atmosphere. And you won't see it anymore. It'll become water vapor. So those are the stages of ice, and the same thing happens with coal when you burn it. And to visualize it, this is a company we did some work with recently, and they were not a huge emitter, but that's what they look like in terms of what they emit each year. 289 metric tons of CO2 equivalents, looks like a tower block that big. To visualize energy then, this is a site we went to recently, and they have an open door policy. It's a leisure centre, so the door has to be open all the time. And there's a heater you'll see above the door there. Now, if you see that from a different perspective, that's what you're seeing from the outside. So the heat coming out through the door all day long, and on the inside, the hot air is blowing the hot air straight out of the building. And you can see the temperatures there quite significantly different, 20 degrees different in centigrade terms. Looking again at 2 plant rooms. First there is a swimming pool, the second there is a factory office. And you would think that they're fine because they're covered in foil in terms of the pipework, but all of those red and white areas and orange areas are heat spots. They're basically flanges and valves that are allowing the heat to escape at pretty high temperatures. So basically wasting energy and emitting carbon unnecessarily. This is something we work with quite a lot. This is half-hourly data. So each one of those boxes, the 6 boxes there, is a day from midnight to midnight. And you can see there that you start off at midnight, people come to work around about 9 in the morning, power kicks in, electricity starts running for the day, and about 5 in the evening, they drop off again, and it goes down to a baseline. And you can see the baseline there is fairly static over the weekend, quite high. But look at this weekend here. This weekend should be down at the green line. It's way up here. And in actual fact, this was happening for the whole year at this organisation, and it equated over the weekend to 134 kilowatts of power running every hour over the weekend, which equates to something like 89 kettles daily. So if you can imagine walking into that office on a Monday morning, having had 89 kettles boiling constantly over the weekend, you get a feel for what kind of storm you created there. This is the same organisation. You might look at that and say, well, it seems to be okay because it's doing a sort of lump in the middle of the day and the weekends seem quite fine. But look at Christmas Day. Why are they working on Christmas Day when in fact they're not? And Boxing Day is the same. This is the same organisation, and you can see here that the daytime use of electricity, the blue line, is fairly high. The red line is nighttime, where it should be down here, and the green is the weekend, which again should be down here. And so you can see in actual fact, their weekend and nighttime electricity use, when there's nobody in the office, is actually greater than their daytime use. This is a better office. This you can see is a baseline. So this is power. So you're looking at about 3.5 kilowatts of energy use during the daytime. This is morning time. And you can see when things get kicked in, power goes on, then this is showing the surge of power being used. This is lights going off. This is under desk heaters going on. So one and then another one, and then they stay on, they're dropped off again. So, you know, 2 under desk heaters using that much power effectively, as much as a full base load. This is something called heating degree data. So it's looking at your heating against the outside temperatures in an organisation. So this set of dots here is the monthly gas bills, and they should all touch that line of best fit. So ideally an R squared here would be 1 in a perfect world, which never happens. But if it was 0.95, it would be as good as gets. So you know, when the cold gets outside too much, then you have heating kicks in and it works perfectly. So this bottom one here isn't too bad. This one at the top is pretty awful, and these outliers here are a real concern. This is 2016 data, but it was a year then. It was the year when transport overtook energy supply in the UK as the biggest carbon emitter. So transport is getting greater and greater in terms of emissions. And just for reference here, waste management, which includes plastic, which is something we talk about all the time, is only 4% in carbon terms. So very, very small. We obviously work with fleets quite a lot, and this is just a basic profile of a car fleet. These are the kind of vehicles we hopefully don't get too involved with these days, but just looking at those, that first picture there, we typically save about 10 to 12% of fuel on a fleet like that. The fleet at the bottom here would expect to save something like 18 to 20% of fuel. And when we're looking at fleets of 20, 30 million pounds a year of diesel, that's significant. These are the kind of fleets we normally work with, and they're much more difficult to make savings with. But even with a company like this, I think we found them 12% of savings in terms of fuel, which is obviously worth having. Now, you'll hear more and more, I'm sure, about offsetting, and it's a real concern for us because, you know, we've got situations here of Pakistan planting 10 billion trees, Saudi Arabia to plant 10 billion trees in the desert. Shell across the world have talked about planting trees the size of Spain or covering an area the size of Spain to offset their emissions. But there's a problem with that, of course. And it's all about scope and size, isn't it? Natural emissions of CO2 equivalents, including methane, are anything between 18 and 39 gigatons of CO2 equivalents per year. The absorption of that is around about 14 to 26. So naturally, most of that natural emission is absorbed. But on top of that natural emissions, there's around about 37 gigatons, 37 billion tons of CO2 emitted each year. And that's just a 2017 figure. And it's rising year on year. And just to give a context of what a gigaton looks like, 1,000 million tons is the mass of all land mammals, excluding humans. So it's about 200 million elephants worth of weight or mass. And humans are an additional half a gigaton. Why not just plant more trees? Well, we all saw what happened in California last year, in Australia, in Cyprus. If what had happened in Australia had happened in the UK, then an area the size of that red square would have been burnt to pieces. So all the trees planted in that area would have been wiped out. And of course, when trees burn, all that CO2 as carbon is given off to the atmosphere and lost for good. And it takes something like 100 years for a tree to capture the carbon that's needed to give this sort of benefit. And in the first few years, of course, as a sapling, it gathers almost nothing through sequestration. So legislation that's going to affect you guys, or already does, ESOS is something we work with and have done for the last 4 or 5 or 6 years. It came out in 2012. It first hit large companies across Europe in 2014. And it's based on staff turnover numbers, which is an absolute definitive. And then if you are under those staff numbers, but you have a turnover or a balance sheet and those figures there, then that also would affect you. Quite a large number of large companies. There's a consultation out right now with the UK government to include medium-sized companies too. And it's a 4-yearly piece of mandate and a big fine if you don't do it. Those are the dates, and it requires an ESOS lead assessor, someone like myself, to come and actually do the physical audits of the site and write the report and give it back to you and notify the agency. Obviously, the government have been trying to ascertain how valuable it's been. They identified in the phase 1 of this, we're now in phase 3, £2.2 billion of potential savings. But actually, all they saw of people actually doing this in terms of companies acting on the recommendations was £250 million. So a very small saving has been achieved so far because companies aren't mandated to do the actual work yet, only do the reporting. Another piece of reporting that the government have put in April 2019, just for the UK, is something called streamlined energy and carbon reporting, which will affect large companies. Again, the thresholds here are slightly different. It's 250 employees, it's a turnover of 36 million, annual balance sheet of 18 million pounds, and it's any 2 of those. And it's all about carbon, and it's all about getting the word out to the public. So anybody can look at your SCCR report and see how you're comparing against organisations similar to you. Climate change agreements are ways of getting money back, sort of tax rebate, if you will, if you're a large organisation that uses a lot of energy, and you do that through clamping and putting clamps on your equipment, your large equipment, to ascertain what your savings could be over time. And you can get significant savings on the CCL, the climate change levy. So for example, here, the climate change levy each month is costing this company £520. The saving you would get would be £477 a month. So in this sense, about £6,000 a year could be saved by working to actively reduce emissions and energy use. ISO standards are obviously quite important, but they're voluntary standards. So 14001 Scott talked about in terms of environmental standards. EMAS is similar to that, although not widely used, but it's much more European. ISO 50001 can be used as an alternative to ESOS, which you talked about earlier. So who takes this on in organisations like yours? Well, compliance managers are people we talk to most of the time for ESOS audits, health and safety managers, operations managers. In short, it's you, I suspect. Oftentimes, the people I talk to when I'm going around sites and running audits are people just like yourselves. So in terms of international scopes, for carbon emissions generally, scope 1 is things you control. So fuels that you burn, like petrol or diesel or mains gas, kerosene. Scope 2 emissions are things you have limited control over. So electricity, which you buy, it may come from the grid, or it may come from a wind turbine, or from hydro or solar, or it might be from a district heat network. And then scope 3 is everything else. It's things like waste, it's water, it's commuting, it's what's called grey fleet, or mileage reimbursement. And you would agree when you're setting out your scopes, which of those scope 3s are in, if it's your supply chain, for example, and which aren't. But certainly if you're looking at a carbon management plan, scope 1 and scope 2 are absolute and must be done. So that's the definition I won't bore you with of carbon neutrality or greenhouse gas zero emissions. Science-based targets you'll hear more and more about, and lots of organisations are signing up to these without fully understanding what they're signing up to. And lots of the organisations that have signed up to this are committed without actually committing. They're not committing to a 1.5 degree reduction over pre-industrial emission levels. Some are committing to 2 degrees, which is kind of missing the point before they start. This is what we tend to do with organisations, having gathered all their data and got a baseline for a year. We'll look at the behaviours, we'll look at measures, we'll look at technologies, controls, actions, we'll measure and verify and then review, and we'll build them a target and a trajectory to get from where they are today to get to their target point in time, maybe like 2030, 2040, 2050. And the last things we'll do is sequestration through things like tree planting, and then offsetting is a very, very final thing. What are the drivers to all of this? Well, runaway climate change, which is going to be affected in things like uncontrolled migration, unlivable areas of the world, sea level rise, uninsurable properties. But more importantly, from your perspective, in terms of what you're going to be hearing on a day-to-day basis, your supply chain will demand this of you. Your customers will ask to see your credentials, what tons of carbon these widgets are actually emitting when they're produced. The tendering process will require it, certainly with public sector. Reputation is going to be key, particularly if you're publicising this in Companies House. And perhaps more positively, an effective employee engagement campaign on its own can save up to 10% of energy costs and therefore carbon. So suppose your organisation spends 20% of its outgoings on energy and fuel, which is quite common. Then a considerably 10% saving on that is a 2% improvement on your annual profits. And that's 2% profit without any additional sales. In 2019-20, we saved £33 million for our customers in energy and fuel, which was 23,500 tonnes of CO2 equivalents, an average saving of around about 17.4%. So that's 3.5% of additional profits per company per year without selling another widget. And that's where I want to end. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Alan. Thank you very much indeed. Just to let people know, the session is being recorded and the slides will be available then. An interesting question. I was going to hold on to this question for a general discussion until after Veronica had spoken, but I'm going to throw it in now. Khaled's asked, and I have a view on this, but I'm going to keep my mouth shut because Melissa will tell me off otherwise. Don't you think climate change and environmental issues need environmental professionals more than health and safety specialists? In fact, environmentalists have good background, geology, biology, chemistry and physics, where some safety professionals don't have such qualification. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I would agree. I think it's a real concern that the people who are put forward in companies to deliver on this agenda are not always qualified to do the job. And they typically are specialists and professionals in health and safety and compliance, I find. And it's generally been the case that over the last 10 to 15 years, certainly in the UK, organisations have got rid of their energy managers, their carbon managers, their sustainability people, because they've found that they've done their job. They felt that they've done enough and it's time to move on. So they've made them redundant. And so now it's come down to an issue where they need to have these people in post. They just haven't got them. So they look around the organisation and say, who's the next most appropriate person to put in the post? And it's generally health and safety or compliance. So these are the people I tend to work with when I'm walking around sites and trying to get them to compliance.
I have an elephant in the room question, which I'll ask after Veronica, that will pull a few things together. My only other quick question is, how easy is it to become an ESOS lead auditor? How many of you are there?
There's about currently, but you get what you pay for. There are bodies, I think there's 9 bodies now, registration bodies, that allow you to become an ESOS assessor. Now, some of those bodies, and probably about 7 of those bodies, will allow you to do it by claiming you have 2 years of energy experience, which includes housing experience, as in auditing a house, and then a 2-day training course. Now, I would argue that isn't enough to go and do a factory audit by any stretch. So most of the proper organisations, like the Energy Institute, or perhaps SIBSE, or the UK Association of Energy Engineers, would put you through a full process. And that would take typically, at best, around about 6 or 7 years to become qualified, chartered, certified, and then to be able to do a proper audit. So dropping somebody in as a house assessor into a factory or haulage company and saying, off you go, is a dangerous place to be. And unfortunately, quite a lot of audits have gone that way. But that's the nature of the beast. Thanks
very much indeed, Alan. Melissa, you got a quick one?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to your comment there. So no, it's a very valid point. And I'm not advocating that health and safety professionals take on all this sustainability piece. And it's interesting, Alan, that you give that historical piece that, you know, those rules were there and they were made redundant. But now, as I said before, I'm seeing so many advertisements for sustainability rules, etc. I think there needs to be a recognition of what's coming or what's here already, and ensuring you do have the right skills and competencies in your organization to do it. Why I liked Scott's article is that I agree there are some technical aspects that a health and safety professional may not have from the start. They may decide to, you know, expand into that. But there are some health and safety aspects of climate change, like, for example, heat stress, emergency response management, because we're having more floods and hurricanes, etc., that impacts the health and safety professional outside of, the stuff that you said, like ESOS and SCCR and, all the carbon scope 1, 2, 3, etc. So there is some part that we will have to play as health and safety professionals. And then there's some parts that we may not have the skills and knowledge to be in, and we have to raise our hands and say, what, we need to bring in that skill and knowledge.
Absolutely agree. I think we all have different areas of expertise, and I think it's important that we recognise that. There is a real danger right now, certainly with the SECR regulation, the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting regulation, that lots of auditing companies, lots of financial auditing companies are writing these things for companies without understanding what they're writing about. They're running calculations based on what they think carbon is without fully understanding it. So lots of companies have come unstuck by hiring financial accountants to do this sort of work. So there is a danger there always, and I think it's really important. But it's also important that people like yourselves, IOSH professionals, are in this game, I think, because you understand the wider background, and the risk aspect is huge in this, and I think it's a really important point you make there. It's
worth noting that 83% of IOSH professionals do something else on top of health and safety. Only 17% are silo, just health and safety. And that raises, to me, far bigger competency issues. I'll pick up on the questions after Veronica. Alan, thank you very much. I must let Veronica have her speak, and then all the speakers that come on will have a round robin questions. So I'm trying to pick off the questions as we go. So Alan, thank you very much. Veronica, good evening.
Hi, Dave. Thank you. Hi, everyone. So thank you, everyone, to be here tonight. I know it's a bit late or probably too early for somebody, depending on where you are. Right, I'm Veronica Scarano. I am actually an IOSH committee member of the Environmental and Waste Management Group. But I'm also a health and safety compliance and performance manager currently. This is my very first role where I don't have to kind of worry about any environmental aspect. So tonight, it's a real pleasure for me to be here and to be talking to you about the impact of circular economy on OSH professionals. So I think it's safe to say that it's in everyone's best interest building a world free from waste and pollution, but getting to zero, it takes a long journey. So tackling the emissions that remained from all the action that we intend to take requires a revision of how we design, make use the products and materials that we have. So if you look at the circular economy, it needs to get to net zero emission, and we start from a projection by 2050 by getting at 51 billion tons of emission per year. And these 28 billion tons are emission that comes from electricity, production, distribution, consumption, and transport. Then 23 billion tons come from emission from the industry, but also agriculture, forestry, and land use. So all of these can be reduced through a lot of things, so a lot of actions like energy efficiency, renewable energy, and electrified transport, and can be reduced through technological innovation, carbon capture, use, and storage. And 10 billion tons can actually be cut down by transitioning to a circular economy. I would like to point out that, although we always think about circular economy strategy as a very complex process, in reality, to have a very impactful strategy, it doesn't have to be complex. And to summarize in very few words what a circular economy is about, is an alternative to a traditional linear economy. So make, use, and dispose, in which we keep resources in use for as long as possible, and we make the most of it. And then we recover and regenerate product and material at the end of each service life. The three biggest sources of greenhouse gas emission from the industry are from processes that are chemical processes, high heat, but also landfill and incineration. And if we look at one of the probably most profitable at this stage industry, which is the construction industry, the three most impactful circular economy strategy to reduce the emission from the built environment are very simple and are things like making better use of existing buildings, or also reusing and recycle the material and designing new spaces in ways that eliminate the waste. If we look at some data, so up to 70% of the CO2 emissions can be removed by using recycled instead of the virgin materials. But currently, very little percentage of the construction and demolition waste is actually reused or recycled. And this is not because it's not possible or there is no method to do that, but it's more for a lack of information about building materials, components, composition. And I think that probably if we would have for each component a digital passport which clearly details the material composition alongside with possible reuse options, the material would obviously be far less likely to be wasted. And the 50% is often possible to achieve the same structural strength of a building using 50% of the specified cement. And this is also because of new technologies. So if you think about the 3D printing for foundation and supporting structures, that can reduce the quantity of materials that it's needed through innovation and structural form. So this goes beyond building other areas of the built environment. And then we come to more current situation like the pandemic with COVID-19. So if you think about the way of working that is so dramatically changed during this pandemic, 4 out of 10 workers have switched to working from home. And that left quite an enormous number of building, offices, retailer spaces empty. And there is an opportunity to adapt those offices into spaces, and that will probably address also a housing shortage and will then help the circular economy strategies for councils and so on. But of course, there is a big question. So how can OSH professional help organization to tackle climate change, but also to help them to build a circular economy strategy? And we have to kind of recognize nowadays that sustainability growth can really only happen if we balance the social, the economical, and the ecological issues and impact. So climate change and OSH professionals. So global societies, economies, and workplaces are obviously changing, and organization and OSH professionals face many new and emerging risks. After years that we've been only focusing, and no, I'm not just saying only, but mainly focusing on to reducing physical injury incidents. Nowadays, the OSH professional are facing new challenges like the climate change, which is affecting the risk profiles of an organization. And then we have technological change that is introducing new activity risks. And these also regards employees' demographics that are changing in response to the need to keep people healthier for longer. And then we also got organizations that are definitely beginning to understand what sustainability means. And I suppose that these also help because employees, investors, they all recognizing that it's an important role, and employees are being considered a source of value rather than just a fixed cost to the company. And at the moment, I think there has been no better time for raising the profile of the OSH professional like today. But of course, this changing environment is demanding new skills, which we might have or we might need to actually expand and build on. But all of these skills are technical, but also organizational and also managerial. So we have currently health, safety, and a lot more of competencies. And I'm saying this because, as I initially said, I am in my first post where I don't have to worry about environmental aspect so much, because we have two completely separate departments. But in all my career and from past experience, I had to be very technical, and even where I wasn't, I had to actually, improve my knowledge and skills pretty much along the way, with things like sustainability and water efficiency, energy, materials, innovation, legal compliance, due diligence, and of course, waste management. But this is just to name a few of the aspects that perhaps we have to look at. So I know that the question with regards to how we actually have a role into the climate change and into the sustainability. And I think that is important, and I quite like this quote from the World Health Organization, where they define a sustainable development as a strategy to meet the needs of the present world population without causing adverse effect on health and on the environment, without basically compromising the ability of future generation to meet their needs. So sustainable development relies on several principles for framing its actions, and obviously many of which can clearly be applied to occupational health and safety. But these principles include the necessity to give the health and quality of life of people and to take care of the prevention of the known risks, but also the application of precaution when there is an uncertainty with regards of the risk. So it might be considered that occupational health and safety and prevention of injuries are really going hand in hand with what regards sustainability. So in my opinion, what safety professionals do technically doesn't change, but in the current era, what changes our ability to actually influence the business. As I said, you can't have a sustainable company without having an engaging and innovative workforce. And in a lot of organizations, I know that health and safety tend to be siloed, but sustainability can be seen as an opportunity sometimes to connect the health and safety function with other areas of the company and align the goals to the broader business. So I think that I would like to conclude that sustainability is all about a transparent system and showing that we really care about our people's safety and our environmental impact and many other things. And that transparency needs to be matched with a firm commitment to eliminate the exposure for workers and for the environment. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I've got the questions coming in, they're rather general, and I want to give all of you a chance to have a go at it, have a go at the questions. However, I do have one question on behalf of our IOSH facilitator, who's behind the scenes helping us all out. I don't know the answer to it, so I'm going to ask the question, if I can now find it. It is the question about wood burners. How effective, or what is the damage or advantage of wood burning and open fires in homes? And you've had that question before, I reckon, because you're smiling.
Just a little bit, yeah. They started off as a great idea, because the idea was that you burn a tree which, you know, then emits carbon dioxide, but the tree had already sequestered the carbon dioxide in the first place. So it's a circular economy. It's what Veronica was talking about. The problem, of course, is that when you're burning one of these things in a house, either in an open fire or in a wood burner, you don't have the scrubbers in the chimney stack, in the flue. So what comes out of the top, apart from carbon dioxide, is dioxins, it's furans, it's PM10s, PM2.5s, particulate matter, unpleasant things that tend to kill you over a period of time. So apart from that, apart from the fact that they're very unpleasant in terms of the air quality you get out of them, if you're transporting that material, that wood pellet or chip, more than say 20-25 miles, then it's not sustainable, because the transportation fuel to get it from there to there becomes a nonsense. So I would suggest that if you can avoid it, then avoid it. I know America have gone down the route of going down biomass for their power stations. So instead of using coal, going down the route of burning wood, and Drax has gone the same way, but it's a dangerous precedent, I'd suggest.
He's just told me he's actually won an argument with his brother. He's a happy chappy, so he owes you a pint, I reckon, or whatever the sustainable equivalent. But the questions are rather general coming in here, so I'm going to throw them out. And on the first one, Parisa, what is your recommendation for the environmental impacts reduction? Is there a simple one-line answer anyone can come up with? I can think of many a thesis and dissertation of encyclopedia, but a quick answer, because it is complex. If there was one, try to rephrase it. If there's one thing you would recommend business to do, what would it be?
If it was me, I'd say energy efficiency, because it makes a fast payback, it makes a fast return. So if you can get your house in order, if you can insulate your property, people talk about wind turbines and solar and hydro and exciting things, dinner table conversations. If you can fix your insulation, get your fabric sorted out, you'll save huge amounts of money and carbon. You know, the idea of insulating properties is fundamental.
Veronica and Scott, any thoughts on that from your perspectives?
I'm going to have to agree with Alan. That's the problem I've got at my current location, a very large building built in 1967, very porous. We're having challenges getting our heads around how we're going to efficiently and effectively cool it as it's built. So get our house in order before adding more exciting things. I have to agree with Alan.
Veronica, any thoughts?
Well, I think that as per my presentation, I mentioned that during obviously this pandemic, many things have actually changed. But one of the things that I've noticed is with, you know, working from home and the hybrid way of working has actually had a sustainable impact on energy. And, you know, nowadays, I used to work for a very large organization and we had so many offices spaces. Some of them were absolutely empty during the pandemic because of course we were all isolating, but some of us were actually working in. But still we had to run hot water and all of these things. And unfortunately it is a waste of energy altogether if you look at that.
Can I jump in there? Because someone asked that question about, you know, if you work 4 days versus 5, if that will help. And I reflect on Alan's presentation where I think you were saying on the weekends, it was still high usage. So I've always wondered about offices that keep all the lights on in the weekends, etc. So I don't know if that's something, Alan, you wanted to comment on.
Yeah, it's a common one, I think. We during lockdown, we went to quite a few factories and premises to go and assess them. And we found data like that quite commonly, that, you know, even though there was nobody in the building, they were operating the building as though it was just a full-on working day. So, you know, it's not uncommon to see that, and it's quite concerning. And, you know, when you point it out to organizations who might have a fully competent building management system, a full computerized working system that tells them how to control their building and heating and cooling and ventilation, but they don't adjust it, they don't work with it. It's too complicated sometimes, so they just let it slide. It's a dangerous point.
So if we reduce the workplace from 5 days to 4, how much do you think businesses would save, given that provided they put in place the measures you've got? Or will they have other factors? Will buildings be too big for heating in the first place?
Can I throw in on that one? We did some work for Oxford City Council last year on this because they recognised pretty early on during COVID that there was an opportunity to build back better, that they could actually make Oxford a better place to live and breathe by not having all their staff cars driving in and out every day. So what they proposed to do was to reduce their emissions by only working in the office 1 day a week out of 5. So they asked us to crunch the numbers on that. And what was interesting was that commuting, which is what that is, moving to and from home to work, doesn't normally affect an organisation. You know, they don't pay for it. They don't care how I get to work. They only worry when I arrive at work what I'm going to do. So they didn't have any real data. So it took a lot of work to actually drill into that and understand what they were travelling for and what the emissions were. But we worked out that if they were to move to a 1 day a week rather than a 5 day a week office, they'd be saving something like 550 tonnes of carbon a year, just as one organisation. So there are big savings to be made there. But I think, as Veronica has alluded to, what we're not counting here is what happens if you're working at home with the heating on and there was nobody else there. That heating wouldn't have happened if you weren't at home. So it's counting everything, not just the physical driving to and from work and the emissions from the car or bus, but it's factoring for the whole aspect. And that's very difficult to do.
Oh, I was gonna add something there, because I actually, in my current role, I do have to do some of the scope 1, scope 2 emissions calculations, and there was a report that gave some estimates for the working from home. So I still don't know what was the answer really, because it wasn't like for like comparison. But yeah, even though you do reduce the commuting, you are, you know, especially in the winter months, you were using more at home than you would have. So you have to make sure you're counting everything.
It's right. I mean, the NHS did some work on this a few years ago and realised it was really difficult, which it is. Because, you know, if I've got somebody at home like a wife or a significant other who's already at home anyway, then I make no difference if I'm there. If there isn't somebody at home, I live alone, then, you know, I'm adding to the emissions. So it is difficult. It's not when you're looking at a large organisation with thousands of employees, it's very difficult to pin down. You can do, as you say, averages, but averages are dangerous places to be also.
Thank you, Alan. I've got a question I'll throw, and after this question, I'll pick up some more of those that have come up. This is for all three of you. Should OSH professionals, in brackets in the UK, because that's where most of the people are, have an understanding of engineering principles as a core competency to bachelor's level?
Okay, I'll probably go first. Right, so I know that this question was kind of in the pipeline. I've been literally working all my life as a compliance kind of engineer, but I am actually by core an occupational hygienist. So the technical aspect of it is very important for OSH professional, because although I've heard the comment earlier on in a question that perhaps, you know, health and safety people don't have the technical skills to kind of give appropriate advice on sustainability and environment, but there are also a lot of technical aspects and engineering things that we do look at, say for example water systems. And if you think about Legionella, and if you think about all of these technical aspects, it's not just the health impact, is also there is a technical element. So yeah, I think it is need to be a core competence and skill.
Scott, any thoughts?
I would absolutely agree with Veronica. It has to be part of the toolkit, so to speak. You need not be an expert. I recently had to evaluate a question about a partially secured material on an assembly line. There was some concerns about its tip over potential. I gathered a bunch of information. I had an idea it was okay, but I double checked with a mechanical engineer that I had access to and confirmed that things were where they needed to be. So you need the information, but you also need to know when to connect with subject matter experts for that final conclusion that you may not be able to provide.
Thanks. Alan?
Yeah, I would agree. I think engineers are undervalued in this country particularly. And I think, you know, there is a need for them to be called upon as and when required. and certainly physics skills as well, in terms of the area I work in, you know, understanding when a piece of snake oil is passed your way, recognizing it just doesn't meet the laws of physics is quite important to be able to cast it aside before you go any further. So yeah, I agree completely.
Melissa, do you want to pitch in with a thought?
No, I'm good with that question. Sorry. Yeah, no, I understand Veronica's point. And it is a continual debate. I think it goes back to if it's something that's regulatory or something where, you know, the technical accuracy is going to be life or death. Of course, if we feel that we do not have that skill set, we do get the right skill sets in place. So I think you need to, you know, have that understanding.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Next question I'll pitch in. There's lots coming in. There has been, for Morif, there has been more focus on gaseous emissions and its environmental impact. Can we also look at aquatic lives? What specific parameters should organisations be monitoring in terms of their discharge to aquatic environment? Open to any of you who wish to take it.
I'd just throw a curveball in there really and just suggest that, you know, recently Southern Water were fined several £million for dumping raw sewage into the south coast of England. You know, it's a real issue. I mean, fish are an indicated species, so when fish start to die, you know, you've got a problem. We don't get involved with aquaculture very much, to be honest, so I can't comment directly on that question, but it's a very valid one because it's fundamental to what we're doing around the world right now.
Okay, brilliant. Mr. Plom, you should not, has Alan been sitting on the M25? Alan, have you been stuck on the M25 at all by any chance? I think Alan's being mischievous. He's one of our ex-inspectors who's is there. I think he makes a comment about people getting glued on various roads. You haven't been London way lately. I know you go as far as my place, I think, as far as you go. So Alan's been a good boy. I can confirm that. Next one is Fraser, playing devil's advocate. How can the E question be persuasive when there's so much conflicting evidence out there? Are polar bears from at risk 570s compared to estimated 30 to 50,000 today? Equatorial sea levels constant for the last 50 years and reefs not affected anything like as dramatically as generally claimed. Then there's the issues regarding the sustainable fuels being not quite as green as sold. How can reluctant managers, for example, be brought on board? Can I go to Veronica first?
What was the final question, Dave's?
How can reluctant managers, for example, be brought on board? So I think the question is around with all this information, misinformation, disinformation, and the various messages out there, how can we get organizations to change? I think it's really what additional selling can we do that we're not doing already? Is that a fair, Fraser? I hope I pitched that right and rephrased it for the panel.
I think it's a fair point because I do believe that an organization only change if the there is a drive from the top down. So it has to really start from the leaders of that organization to actually understand and drive that change. We as OSH professional and environmental people can support that decision. I suppose that how to make them probably come on board is most of the times, we need to be honest, probably they don't even consider the health impact much. But if we start to talk about investment and these are very nowadays public information for a company, so it's not just a matter of health and safety anymore, is how good that company will look in corporate responsibility. Is not just purely health and safety and environment anymore. So I think it's in their best interest nowadays to look at how they can potentially support. And it's, as Alan said, it's on you, it's on all of us. We all have to do our bit.
Scott, any thoughts?
I want to answer this one carefully because we're getting outside the safety profession into bigger issues. But I did touch on this in my article. I believe I'm seeing movement towards a tipping point. I don't know if we're past it, we're on it, or we're approaching it. But I'm seeing so many organizations demonstrate movement towards climate action. And a lot of it is being driven by the customer, whether it's a retail establishment, a commercial, something that's commercially available to a consumer, or whether it's an O&M supplier. Again, going back to my former colleagues in the semiconductor industry, you know these names. They're on your cell phone, they're on your laptop, and they may be your search engine that you use to find some information. One of my ex-colleagues calls them the 800-pound gorillas, referencing the old joke, what do you give an 800-pound gorilla? Anything at once. And when these big players push down on the supply chain and say, you will purchase renewable energy, it kind of doesn't matter what your plant manager says. If you want to continue selling to them, you will do it. And I'm seeing that in many more places, supply chain pressure, and then just there's a lot of greenwashing out there, but there's also a lot of organizations making moves towards this direction. So I'm not coming up against the resistance that the questioner is offering.
Alan, any thoughts? You've got plenty.
Yeah, I'm with Veronica and Scott on this. I mean, I've been talking energy and carbon and waste management for the last 25 years to organizations, and I quickly learned not to mention the word carbon for a very long time. And it's only the last 2 years, I'd suggest. I think this is called the Greta Thunberg effect, where I can actually say carbon and not get laughed out the room. You know, people actually want to hear how I can get a carbon footprint sorted out. And it does come down to supply chains and customers demanding this from their organizations they're working with. They want to see what they're going to do, how they're going to resolve this. So I think the argument, and there's still people out there who are going to contest this and deny climate change is happening. Of course they are. But the argument has gone away now. Most people who are rational have accepted this. We've accepted the fact that the oil companies have been lying to us for 40, 50 years and knew the truth 40, 50 years ago, and the documents are out there. And I think now people have recognized this has to happen. It has to happen very quickly, and they want to make it happen and be seen to be doing the right thing. And that's the key, I guess.
Alan, many thanks for that one there. A question onto the waste and sustainable economy around waste. In some countries, the recycling is taken lightly and some of them are totally ignoring it. How OSH practitioners together with environmental personnel to improve this positive practice in such countries as in developed countries. So I think the question is, how can we actually promote the circular economy of recycling and reuse, etc., in other countries, less developed countries? Any thoughts starting? Veronica again, because you're top left on my corner.
Well, I think that, you know, baby steps are always steps. So even if, you know, we're talking about developing country or countries where they are still early days on recycling and circular economy, there's still a lot of things they can, you know, they can do. I've seen something in my old job when I was involved in these, and it was quite nice to see that, for example, plastic materials from the design studio of a car was going to be reused to make actually a surfboard, which is great. And I know that sometimes probably we don't see the bigger pictures, and that's probably what most organizations nowadays are actually seeing the bigger picture. So I do, you know, there are benefits and they can start to see it. So I hope I've answered that.
Thank you. Scott or Alan, any thoughts?
I don't work closely with this anymore, but I would just say waste reduction is cost reduction. And I see that most often with my colleagues who are working hard to reduce water consumption.
Alan, any thoughts?
A few small points. It concerns me that we have so much fixation on plastic. The UK government consults on various things every few months, it seems, and when they consult to organisations about things, they get 100 responses, typically, maybe 150 if they're lucky. When they ask responses on plastic pollution during the David Attenborough serialisation on TV, the Planet Earth stuff, they had 660,000 consultation responses to their consultation. And in reality, plastic is at 1% maybe of carbon emissions. Yes, it's a problem, but we're taking the eye off the ball here, I think. I think from what I see, I lived in Taiwan for a couple of years and I saw fantastic recycling. I saw people taking bottles, washing them out, crunching them, moving them around on bicycles, really good control. I've seen the UK take 25 years to get curbside recycling to work and people to use it. I think, we can't just focus on recycling, we need to get on to bigger things.
David, can I interrupt there? Sorry, I'm still at the office and they are literally going to close the gate on me. I need to drop off. I was going to do this call at home, but didn't get to leave the office in time. So I do need to drop off. So I just want to say on behalf of IOSH Chiltern branch, really thanks very much to Veronica, Scott and Alan. You all can continue, of course. I think there's a couple of good questions still there. I'm conscious also of people's time, but there was one about COP26 and if it will affect legislation, which was one of the triggers for us having this conversation. But I do apologize, I do need to drop off. Is that okay?
Thank you, Melissa. Thanks very much again. And we'll catch up ourselves later.
Okay, so I'll drop off, but I'll leave you all to it.
Yep, there's 3 or 4 more questions. I'll pick those up, so we won't go on more than about 5 past, I hope. Do you see an enforced regime when it comes to sustainability from governments? And could you advise industry standards that provide guidance when it comes to sustainability for small to medium businesses? So is there anything specific for SMEs you think about? Alan, any thoughts on that from your?
Well, and we touched about ESOS during my presentation, which is the Energy Savings Opportunities Scheme, which is European, so all 27 member states plus the UK. The UK government, now we're outside of Europe, are still pushing this really hard. The consultation that came out in July has actually asked questions about medium-sized companies, specifically, should they be included in this? So not just 8,500 large companies, but SMEs, but the larger end of SMEs. And they seem, looking at the number of questions they put about that they want to do this. When government put a consultation out with 5 or 6 questions on one particular topic, you kind of know that's what they want to do. So it's coming, I suggest, yeah.
Okay. The last couple of questions I think I've got now, I'll take these together for all 3 of you. Carly, in terms of recycling, how can we recycle construction waste such as concrete and asphalt? And when it comes on to actually environmentalists play a key role to solve and alleviate the impact of climate change and promote sustainability. What's the role of HSE professionals take into consideration their scientific background challenges? So that's this technical knowledge. It's interesting how the technical side, how actually you carry out recycling. And you and I, Alan, I think have both worked in this area from our previous lives. We 2 people stood outside weighing recycling baskets in the rain, aren't we, one morning? So we do go back a long way. Veronica, do you want to take any thoughts on that?
Are these 2 questions or is only 1 question? David?
It's kind of 2 there, but I think they're linked in. But in terms of recycling, how can we recycle construction waste such as concrete and asphalt? It's a very technical one. Have any of you got any experience on construction waste management?
Construction waste management is, as I said, it's very difficult. Currently, it's a very small percentage of that material that actually gets recycled. Most of it is just crushed and, used as for roadways and for highway maintenance. It's reused in that way, but I would probably more go down the road of pushing to have, new technologies, to actually use it less as a new material. But yeah, there are not so many ways currently. It's not a material that is fully reused, especially in the UK.
Can I signpost viewers to the IOSH EWMG session about 11 months ago? Professor Billy Hare of GCU, we had a whole session about recycling rates, about construction recycling waste, and actually how to actually do it, how to manage it, and how to reduce the environmental costs and financial costs of waste. And actually part of it goes back to waste reduction. Don't buy more than you need.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, in some cases, there was a study that actually demonstrates that the 50% of that material used was going to actually give the strength to the structure at the same level as you would use 100% cement. So in some cases, it's really the design that is the very early step in the dance. I suppose.
So I think the last question I've got is very much then, so for someone who's an IOSH member here today, maybe without an environmental qualification, what qualification or skills, what career advice do you give them in terms of to raise their technical competency to become a professional in this area? If you had to give them one piece of advice, each of you.
Qualification wise, I think that there are quite few. There are, as we can say, probably outside of IOSH, but also with IOSH, you can have, you can follow a climate, an environmental course, which is very thorough, is very helpful. But there are other organizations like AIMA and so on that provide a lot of small training and very technical. So,
okay, Scott, any thoughts?
I would always encourage people to seek continuing education and benchmark with other locations doing good work and find out how they got to where they got.
I'll add to that. I echo that because when I do my teaching, I did do teaching in Hong Kong. We found out students would get a one master's degree in health, safety and environment, for example. They'd finish their course, they get a job, but then they come back and do another degree at master's level in a different area. So they're preparing for their next career change. There is data out there that's saying people have up to 9 professional careers now, not nine jobs, 9 professional careers. That's telling me the higher education sector has got a lot to offer if you look. Alan, your final word to you, Alan.
Thank you. I'd say get a mentor. Talk to somebody who you can trust, who can give you information and advice. I'd agree with Veronica. I think IEMA is a great place to get information about sustainability. Become a member there. I'd suggest the Energy Institute in London is the only organisation in the world that can give a charter for energy, and they're a very good organisation for training. And perhaps maybe if you're interested in waste, then Institute of CIWM in Northampton would also be a good place to look as well. So there's a good bunch of people out there who can give you some good knowledge and some good advice. And I think, get membership to those organisations. At student level, you can do it very, very cheaply and build up over time.
And remember, IOSH can't solve every person's career problem. I think my advice is look at other people, look outside of your comfort zone, and I say learn from others as well. It's extremely helpful. On that note, if no more questions, I'm going to thank very much Scott for coming in. It's not just today, the 3 other chats you've had with me online and the time you've given me. I really appreciate it. Veronica, thanks for pitching in. I know Dave was going to help us tonight and other things have kicked off. So thanks for covering that. Alan, as always, great to see you. And we've got to do that breakfast sometime. All right.
That's good.
So all of you, rest of IOSH branch here, EWNG members, will see you at our next event, whenever it is. Chiltern branch, it'll be see you next month. Thanks again, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.